Hello everyone, thanks for joining us for our third Next Canada couch session. Today we're going to be chatting a bit about our entrepreneurship journeys and how AI impacts our respective industries.
Yes, we are. My name is Veronica from Arealytic, and this is James from Valsys.
Yeah, so should we start off by just talking about our respective startup journeys, how we landed on the idea, that sort of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to jump right into yours?
Yeah, can do. Okay, so mine actually starts a while ago. I was an investment banking summer analyst.
Okay.
And I worked there all summer, and I was introduced to this idea of company valuation. So when you're valuing a public company, it tends to be quite easy because you've got a publicly quoted stock price. If you wanted to buy Coca-Cola, you could buy all of Coca-Cola's shares, and you basically just multiply the number of shares by the share price and you get the value of Coca-Cola.
Simple enough.
Yeah, pretty simple. It's just one calculation.
Right.
And so the problem that presented itself was this idea of private company valuation.
Okay.
So like Snap, before it went public and IPO'd, question is, well, how much should you actually pay for a share in Snap? And the problem there is that there is no publicly quoted stock price. So you lose that kind of power of supply and demand, which is what gives you at least some sense of the fair market value of a share.
Okay.
And the current methods for actually doing private company valuation are quite, well, firstly, they're quite difficult. They involve large Excel spreadsheet models. And then the statistics underlying them, to me, because my background was in maths, seem quite shaky in terms of, I mean, bit of a nerdy thing to say, like digging at the maths, but that was basically one of the things I was quite surprised by.
Yeah.
So I went back to university to do my master's.
Okay.
And kind of towards the end of that, I had absolutely no idea what I was going to do next. I kind of had this crisis of, I don't really want to do a graduate scheme like everybody else seemed to be, because I'm not very good at having a boss.
Okay.
And so then I sort of thought, well, I'll just spend the year after university trying to figure out what I'm going to do.
Right.
And after our exams, I was sitting in the garden of the university house, and this idea kind of came to me. It's like, well, it's kind of lame to say it, but like one of those light bulb moments. The aha moment. I had an aha moment in the garden.
Yeah.
And what that was I thought, well, since the whole point about having a stock market in terms of getting a correct price is that supply and demand is really driving that fair market value.
Right.
Why don't you replace that for private companies by using an algorithm? Now, I didn't know at the time that that meant that I essentially was advocating an AI-based solution to the problem. But I kind of got there eventually.
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't really think that it was going to be anything. It was just an idea I had. I thought, that's a pretty cool idea. I wonder if it's even useful. And then when Jack, who is my co-founder, and possibly watching, I don't know.
Jack, we hope you're watching there.
I hope you are watching. Yeah, so he came back to university. He'd been at Oxford with me. But he'd left the year before because I did a master's. And we were walking to the pub, actually, because we finished exams, so that was completely fine.
Yeah.
And I just told him about this idea I had, and he'd been working in startups. He said, well, why don't you turn this into a business?
Yeah.
And kind of a year and a bit later, here we are. We started off, we had absolutely no idea what we were doing. So Simon, our third co-founder.
As is often the case, so don't worry.
Well, yes, I know. That's a good point.
Yeah.
We kind of went around the house. Simon, our co-founder, who you've also met.
Yes.
He remembers meeting me when we were a couple of months into the journey, and he said that we weren't even really talking about it as a company. We were talking about it as a platform.
Okay.
So anyway, we spent a while trying to figure out where we were going to deploy it. We finally arrived on the private. Hi everyone, sorry about the technical difficulties. I think when we left you, we were just talking about how when we first arrived in Toronto, we were living in a basement, and Veronica used to worry about us and bring us salads at our desk because she didn't think we were eating it.
Yeah, so Next Canada actually does a great job at supporting global entrepreneurship, and they really focus in on bringing young entrepreneurs from around the globe into the Canadian ecosystem. So James and his co-founders were a part of that group, and yes, I think my motherly side came out. But anyhow, we're really excited to have you in Canada.
Thank you. It was really sweet. Veronica used to come over and go, I just don't think you're eating enough. Here is a salad I've made at home. I think you need to eat it. And we go, thanks, Veronica. Anyway, why don't you tell us about your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, I would love to, James. So my journey really began with, I always wanted to do something with tangible impact. And I was fortunate enough in my career to work for some really great companies, including Yellow Pages and a Fortune 200 company, Energy Home Solar. And I was always the type of person that, I guess they call it a suck up.
Okay.
A little bit of a nerd, if you will. Anyhow, so I was always kind of taking on projects that weren't necessarily my responsibility, but that I felt would really impact the organization as a whole, and trying to get kind of senior level management involved in them.
That's hardworking, not a sucker.
Thank you. But I never really felt as though I was able to be in the front seat when it came to driving tangible change. So for me, becoming an entrepreneur was really getting in that front seat and having the control to drive tangible change and really drive impact. I've always been very career driven. So this for me was a way to say, okay, let's put it into fifth gear and let's really do something that's going to have a positive impact on society. So here we are nearly 2 years later. My co-founders and I have been running Arealytic for just shy of 2 years, and it's been incredible. Typical startup journey. We worked from home for the first year.
Yeah, sure. Not from a basement though. So
no, you're right. Yes, not from a basement. Your story's a little better from that perspective.
Better or worse. Depends how you look at it.
That's true. So essentially, Omar, our co-founder, was actually from Mexico. So we were doing Skype calls, and then he would come over once every 3 weeks. There was actually one point in time where he slept on our couch for 6 weeks, so we could just plow through a bunch of projects. But it was a journey in itself. So we're really thrilled to be here.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, Omar sleeping on your couch. Jack used to sleep in my parents' attic. My dad used to come home and say, how's my Stoke Newington incubator going? Stoke Newington's where we're from in London. He literally, and then when we were leaving, we had all these photos. It was like graduating from the incubator and all that. Yeah, so there you go.
That's hilarious. So I think the next thing we wanted to cover was a little bit about, the aha moment. So one thing you mentioned, James, is, here you were kind of in the garden of your university and you had this aha moment. Mm-hmm. I think the specific question is, tell me about a moment or experience where you felt that this is exactly what you should be doing. Did you have, for you, did you have any, any kind of moment like that?
Yeah, so I think that came not right at the start. At the start, as I said, we really were unsure about this process. I didn't know anyone who'd done a startup. Jack had worked in a few, and so he knew this sort of thing was possible. Yeah. But we were very much kind of feeling our way. I suppose my real moment of kind of clarity where I was like, we're doing the right thing and this idea has legs, was when I went back to London actually about 3 months ago after we'd finished building our alpha platform. Yep. So I went back to pitch at a specific demo day, and I afterwards went to meet with a private equity firm, and it was the first person I'd probably shown the alpha platform to, especially the first person other than Jack and Simon, or possibly you or someone else from Next. So first person in private equity that we'd shown it to. Yeah. And what he said almost straight away was, this is odd because this is almost exactly what we're looking for. Yeah. I went to my CEO, a couple of weeks ago and said, we need to look for something that does this. And you've basically just shown it to me. So I sat there and went, oh, thank God. Thank God we've not been building something that everyone's going to see and go, why on earth have you built this? So that was really nice. And since then, actually, it's been, things have been similar. Sometimes people are more skeptical, but I think really the first moment showing that and getting that kind of validation was awesome.
That's fantastic.
How about you guys?
Ours, you know what, I actually, our story is very similar. I think our biggest thing is when we speak to senior leaders, and the first thing that, they ask is, when are you launching? And that to us is just such strong validation to say, we're on the right track. And to see senior leaders in the industry who understand the power of our technology and what it can do for the solar residential ecosystem, really, be curious and show interest in what we're doing. So that to us is this constant validation that's, just helping us sleep at night and plow through those late nights. Yeah, quite.
Sometimes it makes them worthwhile. Sometimes when you're going through them, you're like, do you know what? Why am I doing this?
Yes, absolutely.
But that's a lot of people say the thing about being an entrepreneur is you get incredible highs and incredible lows.
Yeah.
And so it does take a certain type of person to be able to firstly enjoy that.
Yeah.
Because you've got to really enjoy the highs when you have them, because the lows can be so bad.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, it's those wins that get you through it, because you hopefully know when you're in one of those troughs that eventually you'll end up in a peak again.
Yes. On that topic, I mean, what would you say that your biggest challenge has been?
Good question. So I think there's obviously tons of challenges, but the main one was initially not having a massive network of corporate finance guys that we could show the product to. So obviously from the boutique I'd been at, I knew people in the industry. I had friends who'd gone into the industry, but with a lot of people who start fintech startups, especially places like London, they've done 10 years in investment banking or a big consultancy firm, and they have a huge network. And we were really, at a disadvantage there. And for a long time, we did a lot of, LinkedIn, messaging people. You get one response out of 10, that kind of thing. And so that was really tough. That's been mitigated a lot. Firstly, we got onto a legal incubator in the UK at the end of last year with Slaughter & May, who are one of the biggest corporate finance firms in London.
Congratulations.
So, thank you very much. And they connected us with a lot of corporate finance firms. That was really helpful. So we obviously get the validation from having them introduce you, but then also you actually get the contacts.
Yeah.
And then since we've come to Canada, Next has been incredible at introducing us to tons of some of the most well-connected people in the finance industry. A lot of people on the Next board are in financial services, private equity. Then obviously a lot of the partners like Scotiabank, RBC are the biggest investment banks in Canada, and they've been incredibly helpful they put on a lot of the Next events, and then a lot of their really high-level representatives come and discuss the product with us. So yeah, it's been incredible. So that has been one of the biggest challenges, and it's being mitigated now by basically the help we've been given by the programs we've been able to get onto.
And I think we all know the value of a warm introduction versus a cold email.
Yes, yes, definitely. How about you guys then? Biggest entrepreneurship challenge?
Oh boy, where do we begin? No, I would probably say, James, the biggest thing for me has been work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two things that in the last 2 years, there's two things that I really focused in on that have helped me with that. So the first thing is priorities. And I was actually at an event last week. Next Canada was hosting a women's event, and Anne Fabrizi was one of the panelists. So she said something that really struck me. She said, identify the noise. And I think we can all agree that we come in and there's so much to do. But what is crucial to you completing to help you achieve your goal, and what is true noise? Mm-hmm. So one tactic that I've actually implemented in both my personal and career life is coming in and saying, okay, well, what are the monthly KPIs or the quarterly KPIs, and taking that 5 to 10 seconds before starting any task and saying, is this aligned with what we need to do or where we need to be? And if it's not, put it on the back burner.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've actually been working on is letting fires burn. So, I mean, it sounds kind of silly, but a friend of mine, Ashu, actually recommended the podcast Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman.
We talked about that. Yeah.
Yes, we were really just talking. James and I were actually just talking about podcasts before the Facebook Live. So there was one particular podcast where I think it was actually called "Let Fires Burn," and the CEO actually highlights that a good founder, a good co-founder, is able to identify what is crucial to address right now, mm-hmm. and what can burn. And what I mean by that is, maybe you have some broken links on your website, but they're not necessarily on the homepage, and you have this customer who needs your attention right now. You really need to prioritize and identify which fires you can let burn for a couple of days, mm-hmm. because your other option is to essentially say, I'm going to tackle it all, and by the time Thursday comes, believe me, you are done. Yeah. So I would probably say that's really been, that's been my biggest challenge, to say, how do I really do my best to figure out how to manage work-life balance.
Sure, that makes sense. What you say about the noise as well, I've heard that echoed a few times. Like, I've had it referred to as toxic noise.
Yeah.
Not just the noise of your own opinions, but also the suggestions of others. Because what can be, you find that you meet a lot of really dyed-in-the-wool entrepreneurs and some incredible advisors, and often you get a lot of advice that is conflicting.
Yes.
And it's kind of your job as the entrepreneur to almost navigate like the choppy waters of the toxic noise towards your goal, which is essentially just a successful business.
Yeah.
And often, you know, those pieces of advice can be really good. Both of them are really good, but they are conflicting, and you have to decide, because it's your business, what you've got to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Do you want to break into AI?
We can certainly break into AI. Yeah, why not? That's my thing.
So I think the first question that we should cover is, can you define AI for anyone who is watching? And I'm actually very interested to see how you define AI and how I define AI.
Okay, yeah.
Because I feel as though they would be completely different, because my background is marketing. So
sure. Well, I mean, you can see two sides of the coin. You can see the nerdy machine learning answer, and then probably more understandable, less boring answer.
Not at all, but please.
So I'm actually going to crib this slightly from Professors Agrawal, Gans and Goldfarb in their book Prediction Machines, where they describe AI as prediction technology. And so what does that actually mean? Well, fortunately, I have a whiteboard, and I'm going to apologise for inflicting this upon you, but I am going to draw one graph. It's the only graph I'm going to draw all day. But imagine that you're trying to predict something like you own a forest, and you need to cut down a portion of that forest to sell the timber, right? And what you want to figure out is, if you cut down 1,000 trees, how much timber are you going to get from that? Now, one way to figure that out would be to find out how high and how wide the trees are. But obviously, finding out how high every tree in 10,000 trees is can be really difficult. You have to, get a crane or something. I don't know how you actually measure it, but it's going to be difficult to measure them all.
Yep.
So what you might do is measure the relationship between width and height of 100 trees, and then use that to kind of figure out what the relationship might be like across the whole forest. So what you might end up with is, this is me drawing a graph. I apologise, my handwriting.
I'm very curious to see the graph.
Okay, it's going to be really basic. So width on the x-axis and height on the y-axis, and you might end up with something like this. So this would be this is the width of the trees, and this is the height of the trees. And as you can see, there's a sort of relationship. The wider the tree, the higher the tree. And that's kind of what you'd expect. And a traditional sort of statistical approach would be to say, okay, well, let's figure out if we can come up with some rule, which might look like this, which is supposed to be a line, but it tails off at the end. So that would be a linear regression, right? And that would be a way for you to predict what the height of a tree was that was this wide. You just go along to the width, and you go up, and then you go along to the height and say, okay, it's this high. Now, machine learning is really good for that. And that's exactly the sort of problem it would be really good for handling. What you would do is you would do exactly this, train a machine learning regression algorithm, and then you would predict how high the rest of the trees are. Now, that's quite like I'm not gonna lie, I stole that from when I used that example from when I used to tutor statistics after I left university and needed to make some money. Even though I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so you might say, well, okay, fine, that's a fairly boring example. And it might be boring. I find it particularly interesting. But a good example would be like Siri, right? Siri is one of the most famous examples of AI. Yeah. You might say, okay, where's the prediction there? Yeah. And I'd say it's kind of three things. Firstly, you speak into your phone, right? And Siri has to recognize your voice and convert that into text, right? So that's the first prediction. Predicting from a load of sound waves what the text should be that relates to those sound waves. Then the Siri has to figure out, well, what does that mean? I've got a bunch of text and I have to figure out the meaning of that text. So that's prediction number 2. And then finally, Siri has to predict, well, what should I respond? What's the correct response to what is the weather? I've got to go onto Google, send it back to you, and all that kind of thing. People asking questions like, what's the meaning of life? And you have to give back some funny answer.
Those are the fun ones.
Those are all the fun ones.
Yeah.
And so that is a kind of, you can see the power of prediction once you start breaking things down like that. So I think that's probably my definition of AI. I've kind of cribbed it off the professors, but with a unique graph that I have created. Actually, I stole this too. So there you go. Everything of mine is not made up, but there you go. Nothing original, but I hope it's helpful.
No, I absolutely love that explanation, and I love that you actually brought up Prediction Machines by Professor Agrawal and Goldfarb and Gans. I love that book, and I was actually going to explain AI. I actually wrote down a specific line from that book because I wanted to make sure that I share it accurately. But I think, all I can really do is add a layer of icing to what you've already said. My explanation is very similar. So really from the book, AI is a collection of tools that use data to automate tasks framed as a prediction problem. So for example, automatically drawing out the lines of a roof. That could be a prediction problem that someone would manually need to do.
And that is from your technology as well.
That is, yes. That is from our technology, which kind of brings us into the next question.
Yes. Oh, quite. It does, yeah.
So the next question we wanted to ask was, how are you using AI to develop a solution for your consumers? I don't know if you want to start with Valsis.
No, you go first, because you're already in the flow.
All right, fair enough.
Roofs and predicting the shape of roofs based off of, if I remember, satellite data?
Yes.
Okay.
So essentially what we're doing is we're using artificial intelligence to instantly tell homeowners what their financial and environmental returns are. We're also showing homeowners what their home looks like with solar panels using augmented reality to avoid any unwanted surprises and really address the aesthetic barriers of solar. So to take a bit of a technical dive or a deeper layer, I don't want to get too technical, but essentially you're correct. So we're using a mixture of aerial imaging and LiDAR data to essentially analyze deep learning and generate accurate 3D models of a home, which is essentially where a homeowner will see their augmented reality home with their accurate savings and environmental impacts from going solar.
It looked really cool. I've seen it. I got brought in for the UX session where we had to go through and see if the user experience was intuitive, and I got to see all the stuff. So I can tell you it's very cool.
Thank you. We appreciate that. What about Valsis? Can you tell us a little bit about how you guys use AI?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, we're doing machine learning for private company valuation. And if we go back to something similar to the example I gave, we're trying to match the financial fundamental data of companies. So with any company, you have metrics like the revenue of that company, the debt level of that company, its margins, all sorts of stuff. And you also have a valuation figure if they're publicly traded or if they're a private company that's recently undergone an acquisition. So what we do is we feed our algorithms real world examples of these public and private company valuations. So they receive the company's financial data, and then they also receive the valuation figure, and the algorithms learn how those financial fundamentals actually relate to the value of the company. So then what we can do, essentially what we've built there actually is a virtual version of the public and private equity markets. As I said, where we replaced the power of supply and demand with an algorithm. So when a user then goes, okay, I have a company, I have no valuation figure, they can just essentially upload the financial fundamental data to our market and say, well, what's it worth? And the market says, well, based off of what I know about the public and private equity markets, it's worth this amount. And so, yeah, that's what we're doing at the moment. And the impact on the industry would be that it is actually a completely different way to viewing private company valuation. The traditional methods do involve comparing that company to public companies and other private companies, but because they use quite old school statistical methods like averages and means and medians, that kind of thing, they tend to need really small sample sizes, which tend to be bad for actually drawing robust statistical conclusions. And
it sounds as though, I've seen, I've had a little bit of a sneak peek as well, and I am very excited. I myself would, not necessarily be the end user, but I am curious to know, it sounds as though your product would really have a disruptive impact on the ecosystem. What's the market size, if you can share? How much of an impact does this mean?
Yeah, so it's difficult to size the market because valuation creeps in all over the place. In fact, we were talking to somebody the other day about how syndicating loans for banks, they often need to value companies to decide whether or not to get in on lending them money. Okay. So that's an area that we hadn't previously thought of, that valuation could definitely be used in, and certainly being able to value a company quickly, again, really helpful. In terms of the sort of private equity M&A market, we think it's about a $5 billion industry. And what's useful is that nobody is really doing what we're doing. So that there are data providers that provide the data, and then it tends to be the case that analysts and associates at these firms do all the analysis themselves, basically by hand using spreadsheets.
Okay.
And what we want to do is say, look, your analysts and your associates have got incredible instincts about companies and like the qualitative factors.
Right.
But valuation is a combination of data analytics and constructing a narrative around that. So on the construction of the narrative, analysts and associates are really good. But historically, the data analytics tools available haven't allowed them to properly do the data analysis. And so what we do is we say, well, let's give you the best possible data analytics experience. And that basically makes us a kind of the first mover in this market.
Okay. And actually on that topic, you being a first mover, I mean, do you see that there's a lot of AI being used in your particular vertical?
So finance, yes. Finance at large, a lot. Obviously, the retail banking space, I'm sure everybody knows that, for example, fraud is a massive one.
Yeah.
Your transactions go through and the bank needs to really quickly decide whether or not it's fraudulent or not fraudulent transactions.
Yeah.
Then equally deciding whether or not to get a loan to somebody. That's another thing that used to be done manually and now can be done by algorithms. Simon actually called up his bank the other day and they just immediately picked up and said, "Hi, Simon." He said, "How on earth do you know it's me?"
Oh my goodness.
And it spooked him out, and it was because they used voice recognition.
Wow.
To detect that it was him.
Incredible.
Yeah, and so that's part of retail banking that's really being disrupted by AI. But then obviously there's the corporate finance space. High frequency trading is huge.
Okay.
These quantitative algorithms have meant that a lot of trading desks, which used to have tons of people, are now down to several machine learning engineers or PhDs in statistics, etc. In terms of our very specific verticals, of private equity, M&A, not a huge amount is being done from what we can tell. Goldman Sachs have their straps, their strategic analysts, who are technologists, and they tend to try and automate processes like due diligence for IPOs. KKR is one of the biggest private equity firms in the world, have recently been using this thing called Portfolio Central to monitor the value of their portfolios. So yes, this part of the industry, no, but finance at large, there is AI being deployed all over the place.
Is there any particular, I mean, the initial pro that I can think of is of course efficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any particular pros and cons? I mean, let's just have a candid conversation.
Yeah.
Is there any specific cons as well that you see,
Mm-hmm.
to AI being used in your vertical?
Yeah, so the thing about AI, right, is that you're using the past to map the future all the time, right? Because all the data you have is past, historical data,
yeah.
Exactly. And so let's say, for example, the loan example I gave, if it's the case that the loan officers were unbeknownst to them perhaps, but were discriminating for any reason, perhaps based off of gender or age or ethnicity, then that's the data that the algorithms are learning from. Because it's very difficult to make the target prediction variable, will they repay the loan?
Yeah.
What you would tend to do is make it, would a human okay them for a loan?
Yeah.
And so what you might be doing is essentially allowing algorithms to learn historical human biases. And the way some people might try to mitigate that is, well, we'll take away information like the age, gender, ethnicity, but there are other variables which, unbeknownst to you, might actually affect those. So an algorithm, because these algorithms are so powerful, it might learn that certain ethnicities live in certain zip codes, and it might learn that, and then again still learn that prejudice.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely a con. It's something that people really need to think about, that you don't want to be projecting prejudices of the past into the future via an algorithm.
And actually, James, I think you touched on a really interesting point. So actually, James and myself were both at an ML event earlier this week, hosted by Catherine Dune from Integrate AI, and on stage was Anne Kavokian.
Yes, I think so.
Anne Kavuki, sorry. So she was actually the former privacy commissioner in Ontario, and she said, again, she just said something that really stuck to me. She said, privacy equals freedom.
Yeah.
And I think, for the both of us and anyone working in AI, being responsible pioneers of AI and really taking into account, people's data and what it means to them, as well as, like you said, being responsible for using historical data that doesn't have any biases in it, so it doesn't negatively impact our predictions, is our responsibility.
It's also difficult. That's the thing. Like,
yes,
that's the real problem. I think is that you get a bunch of these, and I am one of them. So I'm not casting dispersions on the machine learning community. But you get machine learning engineers who get really excited about data science, neural networks, and the power of these algorithms.
Yeah.
And it does take someone to step back and say, well, hang on, like, what are the implications of using data in this way, as you say? And that can be difficult when people are kind of trying to run away with accuracy and efficacy. And yeah, it can be a real problem. But you're right, that event we went to was really interesting. I thought the privacy as a privacy as a basis. Yes, for actually starters. So you start from the very beginning. You're thinking about privacy. You're thinking about the data that you're using, and it's not an afterthought. Like the example I gave earlier being a good one, where your afterthought might be to remove variables like gender, etc. But
you're using it going in, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. That should be done.
Yeah, absolutely. You're applying these, I mean, you're doing more than just applying these filters to say, okay, let's remove this and let's remove that to prevent the data from being biased. But you're almost building a company with a framework, or you're looking at your data in the mindset of building this framework around not having biased data. Mm-hmm. So yeah, absolutely.
How about in the solar industry then? How is that being disrupted by AI, apart from by arealytic, of course?
Thank you. So what we find, unfortunately, actually, is that AI is not playing a huge factor in solar. Mm-hmm. So we would like to see more. The players that we are seeing, we of course have competitors, and the areas in which they're impacting the most are in the solar sales process, because it is very challenging and it is very, over 40% of leads coming in, over 40% of homeowners inquiring about solar don't qualify for solar. And of those that do, because it takes so long right now, it takes days to tell them what their financial returns are, 30% of people just lose interest. You have to remember, solar is it's a nice to have. It's not a requirement, except of course in the state of California, who now passed a law that said, okay, great, all new builds need to have solar, which we're really excited about. And we hope that, other jurisdictions will follow. Yeah. But what happens is, it's human nature. If I'm curious about something, I'm going to call, I'm going to email, and if I don't get an answer within a relatively, decent amount of time, I'm naturally going to lose interest. But to answer your question, so the AI solutions that are being built really address the solar sales processes. Mm-hmm. However, there's not a ton being built right now.
Right. Okay. I thought it was interesting actually when I was on your app that you immediately get people's attention with you could save X amount by switching to solar. I couldn't because I don't own a house, so I could save £0 by switching to solar. Yeah. Unless maybe I switch my phone or something to solar. I don't think that's going to work though. Yes, but no, I thought that was a really interesting. So, another question of mine would be, what's the size of your market?
So in regards to right now, we are a Canadian company. So when we first started, we were working in Ontario. Mm-hmm. So Ontario had a program called the Microfit program, which filled capacity last year. So we were, in order to stay connected with the ecosystem, both Barty and myself actually previously worked, as I had mentioned, for Energy Home Solar, which is a Fortune 200 company in the US. And when we started our company, we wanted to continue staying familiar with the traditional solar sales model.
Sure.
So as such, we became, we were doing traditional solar sales in Ontario, and the program filled up, and then now we're in the States doing traditional solar sales in 5 different states. And in order to, again, just become familiar with that jurisdiction, those incentives, what really drives, people in the US to go solar. When we look at the market, the U.S. market alone, which is the first kind of jurisdiction that we would like to get exposure to, we're looking at 42 million qualified homes.
Okay.
Right now, we're planning on running a paid pilot in New Jersey this summer that addresses 47,000 of those.
Wow.
But the market is huge.
Yeah,
the market is huge.
Well, this is coming from the fact that I'm European, from the UK. I'd be interested to know, I don't know if you've got the figures, but is there an opportunity like this in somewhere like the UK, or is there just not enough sun? I don't know how much sun do you need to make solar viable.
I'm glad that you asked, because there is a myth. And I'll be sure to publish it on our Myth Mondays on social, so please stay tuned. But a lot of people, actually, a common question that comes up is, well, I live in Canada, what happens when it snows?
Sure, yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
So solar panels will actually, they'll still produce with up to a foot of snow. And and it's, a lot of people have concerns like, well, I live in Canada, and I'm not sure if this is right for me, but you would be surprised that, to give some context, the solar program that was in Canada, in Ontario previously, filled capacity before it ended. So it filled capacity around October, November, and it was supposed to run until the end of December 2017. So there is, not only are people interested, but they're also successfully adopting because the production and saving is so high.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
When you say up to a foot of snow, does that mean actually on top of the... That's incredible. I always thought I was going to be joking when I said that. Surely not on top of them. So the sun goes through the snow to the panel. That's incredible. Cool.
Technology is a crazy thing.
It is indeed. I'm baffled by that. I was blown away. Wow. Okay. Sorry. I've get my head back on. That is really cool.
So one thing I actually wanted to circle back with you on, actually, I think we started talking about something really interesting in regards to, privacy and AI.
Yeah.
I think we hear this constant worry, particularly in the media, about how is AI going to impact the future.
Yeah.
From your perspective, why do you think people are worried? And do you really think that robots are going to take over our jobs? And I say that with a lowered voice. Dun, dun, dun.
So for me, the first reason people get excited and then equally worried about AI is the name, right? And what I think is quite a good way of dispelling this, it's not really a myth, but dispelling some of that worry and sometimes even a bit of that excitement, is to say, well, this name has changed a number of times. Way back when, it was called cybernetics. I mean, that word sounds like it's from a bygone age, but it sounds
like it's from a different planet.
Yeah,
it's very intimidating.
And that's what it was called, cybernetics. And there was this whole idea that cybernetics was going to be incredible, and we were going to have all these. There were tons of films made that were claiming that the implications of cybernetics probably now were that we were going to have robots walking around and helping us make our tea and things like that. Or coffee if you're in America or Canada. So I think it's the name. AI is the name that's been given since it's become really quite popular. Like late 80s, late 90s when it started to take off again. It wasn't that popular then, but then when people started to really make headway on some of the big problems like character recognition, voice recognition, translation, image recognition, there was this explosion and AI was back on the scene, essentially. Now, we're told, again, we're going to mention Professor Agrawal again. He says, if it's not interesting, like your business idea, if you replace the word AI with applied statistics, then you need to think about your business again, because it shouldn't be that the hype of AI is what's driving your business. It needs to be a genuine use case that you are adding value with. And so I would say, firstly, the name is something that gets people scared. They think the Matrix, exactly, we're going to get plugged in and then the robot's going to take over, that kind of thing. But really, as I say, the definition as prediction machines is incredibly important. And then to draw the distinction between prediction and judgment, right? So these machines are incredibly good at like one thing often, or maybe a couple of things, but usually one thing. And the example I gave earlier of, I'm going to go back to my boring tree example because I like it. The example of the tree, what you might say the judgment there might be is, do I actually cut down these trees? I might be able to predict how much timber I can make, but do I actually cut them down because do I make a profit? And then a human would think about the environmental implications. They might think about the implications that they might have to grow some more trees, that kind of thing. Whereas if you made an AI algorithm do it, probably the best it could do is say, based off of cutting down this many trees, you will make this much profit. Right. And so there's that real distinction between humans and AI. And then another thing is that with something like AI, where people are calling it, the next industrial revolution, that sort of thing, there have been predictions that those will be the end of days every time there's been a technological revolution like this, right? There were the Luddites in the industrial revolution who go around smashing up machines that people made, so they're going to take all our jobs. And really what tended to happen was the jobs just moved somewhere else. Right? People, computers, people started having the ability to process information really fast, create information faster. And so I'm not sure I buy into the whole robots are going to take our jobs, because there are tons of jobs that are very judgment oriented. I would say AI algorithms are going to make them a lot easier or at least make the number crunching a lot easier, make the prediction part easier. And then humans are going to be there going, well, based off of these pieces of predictions I've got, I am now going to make a judgment about what's going to happen. So I think that's why people worry about it. And then I would say why they shouldn't. But then I am biased, seeing as I work in the industry and I like AI. What do you think? Why do you think people are scared of it?
I'll start with the first part of the question. I mean, I think that people are scared of it because there's a lack of education. So part of why, I'm really happy to be taking part in this live Facebook post, and part of why, I support podcasts like Ask AI, run by Heather Evans and Jackson and a few other folks, is because I think it's really important to educate people in artificial intelligence, whether it is, like you said, the name itself causing people to be intimidated, or if it is just this lack of knowledge causing all this fear, because when we don't understand something, we naturally become scared.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing. And in regards to, will robots take over our jobs? I think that it will challenge humanity to take on more sophisticated jobs. You know what I mean? Like you said, there's always going back to prediction machines by the professors.
We're doing a great plug today. It's fantastic.
They're not paying for us. It was paying us for this. It's actually so funny that both you and I keep going back to that book, and we actually had no sync up on this before.
No, we didn't.
But no, going back to that book, I mean, there is, there's always this human element called judgment. So whether, I feel as though artificial intelligence will act as a support system and allow humans to focus in on more sophisticated jobs. So will some of the more mundane tasks be eliminated? Yes. However, will this not open up the doors and open up opportunities for us to be positioned in organizations that force us, and that encourage us, not force us, encourage us to take on more strategic and challenging roles? That's my argument. So
I mean, the way I always think about that is like a challenging job might be like a rock climbing instructor, right? AI is not going to be able to do that. And then the less challenging job, or the less value-added job, might be one where your job is basically to just copy and paste things from one Excel spreadsheet into another. It's like 50% of your job. Those are jobs that have been created, and almost it's a shame, I think, for some people that those jobs exist. And they would be probably much happier doing something that, as you say, is much more challenging, interesting, and perhaps becoming a rock climbing instructor. I don't think everyone should.
Is that your secret dream?
It's not actually. I don't know why that's the one I've come up. Maybe I should.
Okay, total. We're just gonna take a side note here. If you were an entrepreneur, what would you do?
Ooh.
I know I'm totally throwing you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair.
But I mean, you came up with this great example of a rock climb instructor. So now I'm just curious.
I feel like I have to say rock climbing instructor now. I've only rock climbed maybe 4 times in my life. Maybe it's some sort of tacit idea I have that I would like to be. So I played poker for a long time. I always thought about going professional poker, but it's a bit risky. And it's a lot of fun. It's also quite a weird job, I think, in terms of the hours, that kind of thing.
Right.
So maybe that. Maybe academia. I really admire a lot of the professors that we get to speak to, and their job seems really enjoyable, getting to think about a lot of these ideas. I think those would probably be 2 avenues I would explore. And then, of course, potentially something in financial services, because that's clearly valuation things, what I'm interested in. How about you?
So when I do have 5 minutes to take off, the things I think about are, I would like to see myself being a serial entrepreneur. I know that sounds so crazy.
No, I'm the same. It's fine. We can be lame. It's fine.
Okay, we'll be lame together. So I would actually, it's funny because, I think this is another week where I worked until 2 a.m. a couple nights, but that's okay. It's an addiction. I absolutely love being an entrepreneur. It's challenging. It has its highs, it has its lows, but I would like to be involved in some sort of non-for-profit. I absolutely love what Tom's Shoes does, where it's like you buy a pair of shoes and they give back. So I really, two things that really, from a humanitarian mission perspective, two things that I really feel strongly about are making sure that everyone has at least food and shelter.
Yeah.
The two absolute musts. So something that would really help people with that, people in need with that. But anyhow, getting back to the question.
No, I actually, that's a really good point. So one of my opinions about entrepreneurship that I think is really powerful is the network it can give you, and B, obviously the potential capital that you gain from it. Now, that's obviously, that can be seen as a selfish thing, but I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, because they're interested in like the impact they can have on society, etc., will often take that network and that capital and then do something incredible in the non-for-profit space. I mean, Bill Gates being probably one of the most famous examples, but a lot of people may want to do that on a smaller scale. I totally agree. That's something I'd love to do myself, is take some of what I've learned doing this, if we're successful in it. Otherwise I'll keep cracking on till we are, and then turn it into something that can benefit people more widely. So I totally agree with that. And I've actually thought of the real answer to what I want to do, which is maybe a bit boring. I think I'd want to do like value investing, so investing based off of valuation.
Okay.
Because I'm a bit of a nerd on valuation and AI. I'm basically a massive nerd. Apologies.
No need to apologize.
Well, I drew a graph, so there you go. Hopefully, I'm the first and last person to draw a graph on couch sessions. I apologise. But yeah, that's, I think, one of those things. I have many jobs I could potentially have wanted to do, but entrepreneurship's better, I think.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think we have one more question.
Yes. So
we're getting some hand signals in the back here. How much time do we have? All right, we'll wrap it up real quick. So James, what do you think? Should we maybe just end with giving everyone a tip? I know we had one more question about, is Canada is now a hotspot for AI. How has the Canadian ecosystem benefited you, or how do you see it benefiting you in the future? Do you want to tackle that real quick?
Yeah, okay. So we're from London, one of the fintech capitals. A lot of people said, why have you left London to build a fintech startup? A massive answer to that is the Canadian AI ecosystem. A program like NextAI doesn't exist throughout the world. I heard about it listening to a podcast, again, with Professor Graham Taylor, who was talking about it. And by the end of that podcast, I thought, we have to apply to this. The support we've got from the professors, and then from, I can do a shout out to our data scientist in residence, Terence de Vries. Thank you very much, Terence. He's been so helpful. He makes my life so much easier, because when I have an issue that I'm like, maybe this is possible with AI, I can just ask Terence, and he says, yes, it is. Read these papers, rather than having to read 30, 40, 50 papers. So that's just been incredibly useful, and I'm sure that will continue to be useful. I had loads of stuff to say about this. I'm sorry, I ran out of time. Do you want to add anything to that?
I would just say that for me, Canada is the birthplace of neural networks, and because of that, essentially what we have is we're fortunate enough to have this amazing both scientific story and business, resources, this plethora of resources. And you know what, same thing, like we've got, Omar, our head of technology, and then supported now by two amazing scientists in residence, Raka Bender and Amir, again, helping us out. Like every time we have a question, they're just there answering emails at 11 o'clock at night, 11:20. It's like, oh wow, people are on the other side. This is great. So I would really say that it's a support system. But we have one tip to give to entrepreneurs, so let's wrap it up with that. We
have to write. I lost my. I had to wipe off my favourite graph. So I'm sad about that now. It's fine. I can draw it again later. So we're writing down one tip that we would give to entrepreneurs, right? Yeah. Okay, cool.
I hope my writing's not too bad. Okay.
Okay, so do we show each other? Do we show the camera? Or we can do both.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. They're totally different, so it's great.
Yeah, they're totally different.
Okay.
So do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So mine is stay balanced. Being an entrepreneur is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And no matter how hungry you are to succeed or to get to a certain financial goal, the one thing that nobody can afford is to lose their mental health. So meditate, exercise, eat well. And it sounds lame, but believe me, it will help you get to the finish line a lot faster.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've done more things like exercise and eating well since we got here, because it's just been so important to like.
Did it have anything to do with my salads?
Do you know what, I'm going to say yes. You can decide whether or not I'm telling the truth. It also had a reasonable amount to do with the fact that Jack is obsessed with exercise.
That's true.
If you live with him, you can't not go for a jog because you feel guilty if he yells at you. So mine is build, which is, so the point of this is that when you're trying to make a product, you need to build a product and you need to show it to people as fast as possible. And I think that can get lost a bit sometimes when you're trying to meet people, build your network, that kind of thing. And building the product can kind of you can get sidetracked on that. And at the end of the day, the thing you're trying to sell is your product. And so my biggest advice, it's probably already on your number one, but it should be at your number one, is build the product and everything else will be much easier. My example about showing the demo, the first time I had that moment of validation, we had built a product. That's what I found so useful.
That's great. That's great. Love it.
Cool.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, everyone. On that note, we're going to wrap up our third Life at Next couch session. The future is AI. Tune in for the next couch session in 2 weeks, where a couple more Next entrepreneurs will be discussing their journeys and will be giving industry tips. I don't know if there'll be any graphs. Hopefully for you, they won't. But thanks very much for joining us. And thanks, Veronica. Cheers.